Special Tribunal for Lebanon is now in session.
Good afternoon on this Saturday, January 25th. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri slams al-Nusra Front threats and calls on Lebanese not to take part in any regional war. First, face-to-face meeting between Syria's government and the opposition hoping to overthrow Bashar al-Assad are off to a rocky start. And police in Cairo fired tear gas to disperse anti-government protesters as Egypt marks the anniversary of the 2011 uprising which ousted President Hosni Mubarak. Former Prime Minister and head of the Future movement Saad Hariri warns the Lebanese and the Sunni sect in particular from supporting questionable calls that urged him to involve the country in what he calls rejected and condemned wars. His statement comes a day after a group suspected of links to al-Qaeda warned that all areas of Lebanon where Hezbollah operates are legitimate targets for attack, telling Sunnis to avoid them. Al-Nusra Front in Lebanon warned Sunnis against approaching or residing in or Hezbollah's near in order to avoid bases and gathering around its meeting points. The Future Movement chief says that questionable calls issued by extremist groups have been proven to be directly linked to the murderous regime in Damascus, and they only aim at making the conflict in the neighboring country slip over into Lebanon. Witnesses resumed testifying before the Special Tribunal for Lebanon's trial chamber on Friday, with one requesting protective measures due to the security situation in the country, and another recounting the horrifying ordeal of his brother, who died 12 hours after the explosion that killed former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, buried under rubble at the St. George Hotel. The STL is tasked with investigating the Valentine's Day 2005 bombing that killed Hariri and 21 others in shattered downtown Beirut. 5 members of Hezbollah have been indicted by the court, 4 of whom are standing trial in absentia at the tribunal's headquarters in Lechendam, a suburb of The Hague. Lebanese Forces Chief Samir Jaja says that harmony between cabinet members would currently be only guaranteed by the formation of a neutral government. The country should not be left without a cabinet on condition that it be harmonious, Jaja told a delegation visiting him at his residence in Marab. He announced that he would not take part in a cabinet in which Hezbollah is represented, even if ally Future Movement leader Saad Hariri has accepted to share power with Hezbollah. Negotiations are underway to form an all-embracing 24-member cabinet, although President Michel Sleiman and Premier-designate Tamam Salam are sticking to the option of a non-partisan government if the rival parties fail to strike a deal. Hezbollah considers a neutral government as a fait accompli cabinet and has totally rejected it. Joining me on the line is Tripoli MP Musbah Al-Ahdab to talk further about the situation in the country. Hello, Mr. Ahdab.
Yes, hello.
Hi, thank you for being on the line with us today. I want to know,
pleasure.
You know, 3-4 days ago, almost a week ago, former Prime Minister Saad Hariri said he would be willing to form a cabinet along with Hezbollah members. Can you please comment on that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, about a week ago, former Prime Minister Saad Hariri said he would be willing to negotiate with Hezbollah members in order to form a cabinet because he said he had to use logic. Can you please comment on that?
Yes, of course. Of course we would like to have a government. I think everyone is tired in Lebanon of not having a government. The affairs of people are totally blocked, and we would like to see things happening. The only thing is that we need some real guarantees given by Hezbollah that the government would not be here to support their action in order to use the Lebanese institutions in their fight within Syria. There has been over the last 2 years, unfortunately, during the government of Mr. Mikati, the use of Lebanese institutions in order to strengthen the position of one side in Lebanon, one party in Lebanon. We were talking about Hezbollah. So the idea is to find real solutions in depth, and I think that President Hariri already made a couple of years ago an agreement with them without having guarantees, and we've seen what happened. So in Tripoli, being in the heart of the confrontations and paying a very high price, it is very worrying to see, for instance, that there are still indictments considering people as terrorists by the government, and if we want to go in and cover the same action coming from the government, this definitely will be unfair.
Many analysts argue that it is because of Hezbollah's direct involvement in Syria on the side of President Bashar al-Assad that we have been seeing these tit-for-tat bombings in just the last month alone, starting with on December 27th, the assassination of former Minister Mohammed Shattah, and then on January 2nd, Harat Tahrik, and then about 4 days ago, another one in Harat Tahrik. What do you think is happening here?
Well, I think that the meddling of Hezbollah within the internal politics of Syria is definitely to Lebanon. This is on one hand. On the other hand, it is also very worrying, and there are lots of question marks. It happens that a member or close to Hezbollah has been accused, indicted of having stolen the cars in Lebanon that have been used in the explosion of Harat Tahrik and Hermel. So it is for the Lebanese security institutions to clarify and to see what is happening. As for the Lebanese government should definitely follow the declaration of Abda and put Lebanon in a situation where Lebanon will be protected by not being interfering within what's happening in Syria, because we see all the reactions that are happening in Lebanon. I'm talking about explosions, and I'm talking also about the threats that we've been hearing from different military.
One last question for you, Mr. Ahdab. Do you think the formation of a government will help alleviate the situation in the country?
It depends on what government we have.
Well, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? Tell me your predictions.
I think if there's a government that will cover and legitimize the existing situation, this definitely would be destructive. If we can find a government based on a mutual agreement and on stepping back on both sides, then definitely this would facilitate. Once again, we need a government, but we definitely don't need a government to legitimize the action of Hezbollah that is not accepted by all the Lebanese. There's no consensus in Lebanon on that, and neither on their intervention in Syria.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Ahdab, today. Face meeting between Syria's government and the opposition hoping to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad started and ended after barely a half hour. The two sides were distant going into the meeting. Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal al-Maqdad said Assad had given the delegation instructions to contribute to the success of the meeting and to build the future of Syria in a way that will satisfy all Syrian people. A leading member of the opposition Syrian National Coalition, Anas al-Abda, said they were cautiously optimistic. However, the Damascus delegation denied it had accepted the premise of a transitional leadership, and the opposition said it would accept nothing less. Lakhdar Brahimi, the famously patient mediator, is credited with efforts to stabilize Iraq and Afghanistan after the U.S. ousted their governments. He is facing a formidable task to build peace in Syria, which has been flooded with al-Qaeda-inspired militants for the last year. Coming up next, the Ukrainian Interior Minister warns that efforts to solve the country's deadly crisis without using force are futile. This and more when we come back. Welcome back. Police in Cairo fired tear gas to disperse anti-government protesters as Egypt marks the anniversary of the 2011 uprising which ousted Hosni Mubarak. This comes a day after two explosions hit Cairo. 4 bombs killed 6 people and injured more than 80 in attacks targeting security forces in the capital. Opponents of the current army-backed interim government are holding demonstrations, with some calling for the return of Islamist former president Mohammed Morsi. Tahrir Square, the popular revolt that toppled Mubarak in 2011, is closed ahead of commemorations by security forces. Interim Interior Minister Mohammed Ibrahim is calling for demonstrations in support of the government to counter what he says is an Islamist plot to spark chaos. Still on Egypt, kidnappers have seized its cultural attaché and 3 other embassy staff in Tripoli, Libya, a day after another of its diplomats was abducted, according to the Libyan Foreign Ministry. The early morning abduction comes a day after the seizure of an embassy administrative advisor from his home in the capital, and despite Libya's announcement of reinforced security measures around the Egyptian embassy. A security official would not rule out that the earlier kidnapping was a response to the arrest in Egypt on Friday of a prominent former rebel commander who fought in the 2011 uprising against Muammar Gaddafi. Shaban Hadea, the head of Operations Center of Libya's Thawar, unofficially linked to Libya's defense ministry, was arrested on Friday in the city of Alexandria on Egypt's Mediterranean coast. In other regional news, shelling west and north of Baghdad in Iraq killed 14 people as militants bombed a key bridge linking the capital to the north of Iraq, the latest in a surge of nationwide violence. The latest bloodshed, which pushed the death toll for January to more than 800, comes just months ahead of parliamentary elections slated to take place on April 30th, and has stoked fears Iraq is slipping back into an all-out conflict. Faced with a weeks-long standoff in Anbar province west of Baghdad and Iraq's worst protracted unrest since 2008, authorities have been urged by foreign leaders to pursue political reconciliation in a bid to undercut support for militants. But Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has taken a hard line, and officials have trumpeted security operations. In other world news, anti-government protesters have pushed forward with demonstrations in Ukraine, with reports of the main energy ministry building in central Kiev being besieged and more barricades being erected in the streets. Energy Minister Eduard Savtetsky said the protesters left, but he had been told they were blocking entry to the building outside. Hundreds of activists have already occupied City Hall and the Agriculture Ministry, both close to the Energy Ministry building, in increasingly violent protests against President Viktor Yanukovych's rule. Big rallies were expected to take place in the center of Kiev this weekend, despite promises by Yanukovych to reshuffle the government and promote changes to sweeping anti-protest legislation. Though the protest movement, known as the Euromaidan, is largely peaceful, a hardcore of radicals are now openly battling police away from the main seat of the protest on Independence Square. Four-time Grammy winner Carole King was honored with an All-Star Grammy Weekend musical tribute and was named the 2014 MusiCares Person of the Year. MusiCares is a recording academy charity that assists musicians in need of a wide variety of services. The concert is one of the charity's largest annual fundraisers. King's 1971 album, Tapestry, remains one of the best-selling records of all time, and both it and King were saluted in the show, with some of its greatest hits performed by Pink, Lady Gaga, Alicia Keys, and King's longtime bandmate James Taylor performed his hit cover-up of King's Up on the Roof, and then joined King's band for a show-closing performance by the honoree herself, including the classic Sweet Seasons.
And you need some love and care in the flare, nothing is going right.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri slams al-Nusra Front threats and calls on Lebanese to not take part in any regional war. The first face-to-face meeting between Syria's government and the opposition hoping to overthrow Bashar al-Assad are off to a rocky start. And police in Cairo fire tear gas to disperse anti-government protesters as Egypt marks the anniversary of the 2011 uprising, which ousted President Hosni Mubarak. Those are your Saturday headline live on Future Television in Beirut. I'm Yumna Naufal. Make sure to tune in to Linda Tamim tomorrow at 4:20 for all the latest. Have a good night.
The Special Tribunal for Lebanon is now in session.